My name's Ken, and I'll never forget the morning my neighborhood's queen of control went too far. I was jolted awake not by my alarm clock but by the unmistakable crash of something heavy shattering outside. Still in my slippers, I rushed out the front door, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Karen, the woman who ran our HOA like it was her personal kingdom, was standing on my lawn with a hammer clutched in her hand. At her feet, in a mess of twisted metal and dangling wires, was my satellite dish smashed to pieces. She brushed her hands together with a smug little grin. "There," she said, as if she'd just done me a favor. "That ugly eyesore is gone." "You're welcome, but here's the problem. That wasn't just a TV dish. It wasn't even private property in the usual sense. It was a federally commissioned emergency receiver, part of a government contract I had because of my background in communications. It linked directly to the Department of Homeland Security's emergency grid, and now, thanks to Karen's hammer, she hadn't just broken a neighborhood rule. She'd committed a federal crime. What she didn't know was that the moment she swung that hammer, two silent alarms had already been triggered, one digital and one very human. When people imagine quiet suburban life, they think of white picket fences, children riding bicycles in cul-de-sacs, and smiling neighbors waving across perfectly trimmed lawns. On the surface, my neighborhood fits that postcard image. But once you scratch the surface, the reality was very different. Beneath the manicured hedges and polite smiles simmered a war of control, pride, and ego. And in the middle of it all, there was one woman who seemed to thrive on chaos. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the president of our homeowners association, a position she treated less like a community duty and more like the crown of a monarchy. She patrolled the streets with a clipboard, knocking on doors to leave notices about everything from a flower pot out of regulation color to a trash can left out 5 minutes past collection time. Her sharp eyes seemed to scan constantly, searching for the smallest infraction, and her sharp tongue could slice through even the toughest skin. I had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. My house wasn't the largest, but it was solid, 2 stories, beige siding, a wide porch, and a small garden I tried to maintain between work projects. My work wasn't ordinary either. I wasn't an engineer in the flashy Silicon Valley sense, nor a regular cable installer. My expertise lay in secure communications and satellite networking, skills I had developed during my years contracting for defense projects. Even though I had transitioned into private consultancy, I still held clearances and occasional contracts with government agencies that valued my background. That's how the satellite dish came into the picture. It wasn't a standard TV dish like you'd see bolted to rooftops for Sunday sports channels. This was a specialized receiver designed to handle encrypted emergency frequencies. To most, it looked like just a slightly larger satellite dish, maybe an outdated piece of technology. But it wasn't. It linked directly to emergency broadcasts, part of a government redundancy system that ensured critical messages could be relayed even if regular infrastructure went down. In other words, if there was a natural disaster, terror threat, or communications blackout, my receiver would pick up the signal when others couldn't. The installation had been approved by the federal contract itself. I had the paperwork. I had the authorizations. Legally, not even the HOA could override it. But Karen, as always, saw things differently. The first time she brought it up was during a neighborhood barbecue, 2 months after it had been installed. I had just finished flipping burgers when she approached, her expression set in its usual mix of disapproval and superiority. "Ken," she said, pointing at my roof with her plastic fork, "that contraption of yours? It's an eyesore. The bylaws state clearly that no unapproved exterior modifications are allowed. You'll need to remove." I wiped my hands on a napkin and calmly replied, "It's not just any satellite dish. It's federally mandated equipment. I've got the legal paperwork, and it's non-negotiable. I'm afraid the HOA can't override federal authorization." Her eyes narrowed, and she gave a tight smile. "We'll see about that." That moment set the stage for everything that followed from then on. Karen made the dish her personal obsession. Every HOA meeting, she brought it up as if it were the most pressing issue in the neighborhood. She filed complaints, demanded inspections, and even rallied a few of the more impressionable neighbors to see the dish as a threat to property values. She argued that it made the neighborhood look like a military zone. Some nodded along out of fear of opposing her, but most people stayed quiet, not wanting to get involved. I tried to ignore her. At first, I believed reason would prevail. After all, the paperwork was clear. I even showed it to her once, placing the federal authorization documents in her hand. She barely glanced at them before scoffing. Paper can be forged, she muttered. It wasn't logic she was after. It was controlled. Karen's need for dominance extended far beyond me. I had heard stories from other neighbors too. She fined a single mother $50 because her kids left chalk drawings on the sidewalk. She threatened to tow a veteran's truck because it was too large and unsightly. She once tried to dictate the color of Christmas lights, insisting on warm white only while penalizing a family that put up multicolored strands. To her, these weren't rules for order, they were tools to remind everyone that she was in charge. The tension between us simmered for months. I'd catch her walking past my house, glaring at the dish as if it were a personal insult. She'd make comments during meetings, little digs designed to provoke. But I never rose to the bait. I had bigger concerns: my work, my life, and frankly, keeping the peace in a neighborhood that already felt suffocating. But peace was never Karen's goal. The night before the incident, I was up late finishing a remote systems check. The receiver had just undergone a software patch, and I needed to confirm its stability. I ran diagnostics, watched the signal strength stabilize, and finally leaned back in my chair with a sigh of relief. Everything was functioning as it should. I had no idea that while I was fine-tuning frequencies, Karen was plotting her next move the following morning. When the crash woke me, I thought at first that maybe a tree branch had fallen. But the moment I saw her standing on my lawn with that hammer, I knew it wasn't nature's fault. It was Karen. The sound of metal bending under the hammer's weight was still echoing in my ears. She looked so satisfied, as though she had just liberated the neighborhood from some terrible burden. Her words, "That ugly eyesore is gone. You're welcome," still rings in my head. In that split second, anger boiled up inside me, but beneath it was something else. The awareness that this was no longer about HOA rules. She hadn't just smashed a satellite dish. She had smashed through a line of legality and into the territory of federal offense. Because here's the thing about that receiver: it wasn't just equipment. It was connected to a secure system with multiple redundancies, including automatic alerts. When Karen swung that hammer, sensors built into the hardware immediately flagged a disruption. A silent alarm was sent up the chain, logging the exact timestamp and signal loss. Somewhere in a monitoring office, someone would already be reviewing the anomaly, and then there was May wasn't just going to let her walk away. Not this time. For too long, Karen had terrorized this community with her petty rules and inflated sense of power. She thought she was untouchable, but she had finally picked a fight with something and someone she couldn't bully into submission. As she dropped the hammer and turned to strut back toward her home, I stepped forward, my voice sharp. "Karen, stop!" She froze, then slowly turned, raising an eyebrow. "What now, Ken? Going to cry about your toy?" I clenched my jaw, choosing my words carefully. "That wasn't a toy. That was government property. You didn't just break HOA bylaws. You broke federal law. And the consequences are going to be far bigger than a fine." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. Just for a moment, her smug facade cracked. But true to form, she quickly masked it with a laugh. "You're bluffing? Don't be ridiculous. No one cares about your silly dish." If only she knew how wrong she was, because even as we stood there, the chain reaction had already begun. Karen's laugh echoed across the street, but I could hear the faint crack in it. She wanted to sound confident, but there was a tremor beneath her voice. Still, she straightened her shoulders, crossed her arms, and gave me the kind of look she probably practiced in the mirror, one that said she was untouchable. "You can tell your little stories all you want, Ken," she sneered. "But this neighborhood follows HOA rules, and I just enforce them. End of discussion, end of discussion." She had no idea what kind of discussion she'd just started. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, not to threaten, but to let the weight of truth sink in. "Karen, the moment you hit that receiver, a federal alert went out. You didn't just destroy property, you interfered with a government emergency system. Do you understand what that means?" Her smile faltered. "You're lying." I shook my head slowly. "You've spent years controlling people here with fines and petty notices. But you can't control this. You can't find your way out of this one. You crossed into a world where your clipboard doesn't mean a thing." For the first time, she didn't have a quick retort. Her eyes darted to the shattered dish on the ground, as if maybe she could piece it back together by sheer willpower. The hammer slipped a little in her grip behind us. A few curtains twitched. Neighbors were watching. Of course they were. This was the kind of drama they had been waiting for. Some looked nervous, others almost relieved, as if hoping maybe, finally, someone would stand up to Harry, could feel the weight of their eyes, but I didn't care. This wasn't about putting on a show. This was about accountability. You should go inside, I said quietly. Because when the knock on your door comes, you'll want to be ready. That got her attention. Knock on my door? What are you talking about? I folded my arms. Federal agents? They're not like the HOA board that bosses you around. When they show up, they'll have paperwork, authority, and handcuffs if necessary. And they won't care about your excuses. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her face paling ever so slightly. She tried to laugh it off again, but the sound was hollow this time. You're bluffing. You think you can scare me with some made-up story about government agents? Please, I've been running this neighborhood for years. Nothing happens without me knowing, but that was the thing. For once in her life, Karen didn't know. She didn't realize the system was already moving, that a chain of events had been triggered that no HOA president could stop. I glanced at the remains of the dish, wires still sparking faintly. Somewhere, a server had already logged the signal failure. A technician would already be tracing it back, pinpointing this very location. And when the report landed on the right desk, someone would pick up a phone and start making calls. It wasn't a question of if. It was a question of when. Karen turned on her heel, muttering something under her breath, and stormed back toward her house. She wanted the last word, as always, but her pace was faster than usual, her movements sharper. She was rattled. I watched her go, my fists still clenched at my sides. For a moment I thought about chasing after her, forcing her to admit what she had done. But no, I didn't need to. The truth would come to her soon enough as the street settled into silence. I took a deep breath and looked back at the wreckage of my dish. Anger, yes, but beneath it, a strange calm settled in. Because for the first time, the scales were about to tip. Karen had always believed she was above consequences. But she had finally crossed a line that no smug smile or HOA bylaw could erase, and I had a feeling the knock on her door would come sooner than she expected. The silence after Karen stormed off didn't last long. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously, and the voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and carried the weight of authority. Mr. Ken Adams. Yes, this is Special Agent Ramirez with the Department of Homeland Security. We're registering a disruption to a contracted emergency receiver registered at your residence. Can you confirm the current status? I glanced at the shattered metal on my lawn, still lying like the corpse of something vital. Confirmed. It's been destroyed. Intentionally, there was a pause, followed by the sound of rapid typing. Intentionally? Can you identify who was responsible? Yes, my HOA president. Karen Miller. The pause grew heavier. Understood. We're dispatching a field team. Please do not tamper with the equipment further. We'll handle the matter from here. When the line went dead, I exhaled slowly. It had begun, but the conflict wasn't just between Karen and the federal government. It was between Karen and reality itself. She had built her entire identity around being untouchable, the queen of her little suburban kingdom. Now, for the first time, the crown was slipping. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. By mid-afternoon, whispers had turned into speculation, and speculation into open conversation. I overheard two neighbors near the mailbox. Did you hear? Karen smashed Ken's dish. She always hated that thing. Yeah, but apparently it wasn't just a dish. My cousin says it was government property. Government property? Oh, she screwed. I didn't need to contribute. I just walked past them, carrying myself with quiet purpose. Let the gossip machines churn. The truth would soon outpace the rumors. Karen, however, wasn't about to go down quietly. Later that evening, she showed up at my door. Her knock was sharp and furious, the kind that rattles the wood when I opened it. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. You called the feds on me, didn't you? I met her glare with calm, steady eyes. I didn't need to. The system called them itself. She shoved her finger in my face. Listen, Ken, you think you're clever, but I've got connections. I've dealt with lawyers before, I've shut down complaints, and I've won every battle in this neighborhood. Do you really think some bureaucrat in Washington cares about a piece of junk on your lawn? I leaned against Theodore's frame. You'll find out soon enough, her face twisted with frustration. You're bluffing. This is just another one of your scare tactics. You're pathetic, and with that, she spun on her heel and stormed away, muttering something about getting her lawyer on speed dial, but for once, her bluster rang hollow. The next morning, the first unmarked SUV rolled into the neighborhood. Neighbors peeked through blinds and curtains as two agents in plainclothes stepped out, their badges glinting in the sunlight. They didn't walk up to my house first, they went straight to hers. I watched from my porch as they knocked firmly. Karen opened the door, feigning calm, but even from across the street, I could see her hand gripping the frame tightly, her knuckles white. They spoke to her for nearly 20 minutes. She gestured wildly, pointing toward my house, no doubt trying to spin the story, but the agents listened without expression, jotting notes and occasionally asking short, pointed questions. When they finally left her doorstep, she looked shaken. The agents came to me next, professional but polite. They took my statement, photographed the wreckage, and asked if I had any prior conflicts with her. I told them the truth, her vendetta against the dish, her repeated harassment, and her obsession with control. One of the agents, Ramirez, gave me a nod. You've been cooperative. We'll be in touch. For now, document everything and avoid contact with her if possible. Easier said than done, because Karen wasn't just going to roll over. She started rallying what allies she had left, mostly the timid board members who had always bent to her will. She called an emergency HOA meeting that very night. Flyers appeared on doorsteps. The agenda, of course, was Ken's illegal satellite dish and false accusations against the HOA president. I attended, of course. The room was packed with curious neighbors. Karen stood at the front, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Neighbors, she began, her voice sharp and commanding. We have a serious issue threatening our community. One of our members, Ken Adams, has installed unauthorized equipment that endangers our property values and may even attract unwanted government interference. And when I attempted to enforce our bylaws, he retaliated by calling federal agents on me. Murmurs spread across the room. Some looked uncertain, others skeptical. I raised my hand, my voice steady when she tried to ignore me. That equipment was authorized by federal law. I showed you the documents, Karen, multiple times. You chose to ignore them. And you didn't just enforce a bylaw, you destroyed government property with a hammer. That's not enforcement. That's vandalism. That's a felony. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen slammed her clipboard down. Don't listen to him. He's exaggerating. The government doesn't care about something like this. It's all scare tactics. But at that exact moment, as if on cue, another black SUV rolled slowly past the clubhouse window, headlights sweeping the room. Every head turned. Every eye widened. Karen froze mid-sentence. Timing couldn't have been more perfect when the meeting ended in chaos. Neighbors huddled in small groups, whispering. Some avoided me, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. But a surprising number approached quietly, offering nods of support or hushed words like, "Good for you," and about time someone stood up to her. Karen, however, was unraveling. The next day, she tried intimidation again. She left a notice on my door, claiming I owed $500 in fines for failure to comply with HOA regulations. I laughed out loud as I read it, then slipped it into a folder with the rest of my documentation. Every piece of paper was just another nail in her coffin, and sure enough, the agents returned that evening. This time they didn't just talk. They walked Karen out of her house, calmly but firmly, asking her to come downtown for questioning. Neighbors gathered silently on lawns, some pretending to water plants, others openly staring. Karen kept her chin high, but her face was pale. "This isn't over," she shouted at me across the street as they escorted her to the car. "You'll regret this?" But the crack in her voice betrayed her as the car door closed and the SUV drove away. The neighborhood stood in stunned silence. For years, Karen had been the untouchable queen. Now she was just another resident facing consequences. She couldn't bully her way out of Anne for the first time. The balance of power in our little community shifted, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a battle that would test not just Karen's limits but mine as well. The night Karen was escorted away, the neighborhood felt Different. The air itself seemed lighter, as though the stranglehold she had maintained for years had finally loosened. But I knew better than to believe it was over. People like Karen don't just give up. They double down. And sure enough, she came back 2 days later, and Uber dropped her off at her driveway. She walked up the path in her usual brisk, self-important stride, but something about her looked different. Her hair wasn't as neatly styled, and her clothes were slightly wrinkled. Her eyes had the hard, defiant gleam of someone determined to fight. But beneath it, I could see fatigue. That night she went door to door, trying to rebuild her crumbling empire. I heard her voice drifting through the street, sharp and desperate. They're targeting me. This is harassment. Ken is exaggerating, and the government doesn't care about a broken dish. But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. Some closed their doors before she finished. Others gave polite excuses. I saw one couple shake their heads and mutter, "Not this time still." Karen wasn't done the following morning. I got a letter shoved under my door, an official-looking document with HOA letterhead. It was a notice of violation, claiming my lawn was non-compliant with community standards and threatening daily fines. I almost laughed. Even after federal agents came to her door, she thought a piece of HOA stationery could intimidate me, but this time I didn't just file it away. I made a copy and handed it directly to Agent Ramirez when he visited later that afternoon. He skimmed the letter, shook his head, and tucked it into his folder. "She's digging herself deeper," he said quietly. "That's good for us, not for her." Over the next week, the investigation escalated. Trucks arrived, hauling away the shattered remains of my receiver. Technicians in DHS jackets inspected the damage, documenting every wire and panel. Karen watched from across the street, fuming, her arms crossed as if daring them to set foot on her lawn. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. People who once avoided my eyes now stopped me on walks. "Ken, do you think she's really in trouble? She smashed government property. That's not a parking ticket." Finally, someone held her accountable. About time. For the first time in years, the fear of Karen seemed to be lifting. People were starting to remember what it felt like to live without her shadow looming over every decision. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. One evening, as I was locking up my garage, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. I turned to find Karen standing there, eyes blazing. "You think you've won, don't you?" She spat. I stayed calm. "I think you made choices, and now you're facing the consequences." She stepped closer, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You don't get it. I'm from this neighborhood. Without me, everything falls apart. The lawns get sloppy, the houses lose value, and chaos takes over. I'll keep order here." I stared at her, truly seeing the depth of her delusion. "You don't keep order, Karen. You control. You bully. You crush people to make yourself feel powerful. And now, you finally crushed the wrong thing." For a moment, her eyes wavered, then hardened again. "They won't lock me up. I'll get a lawyer. I'll turn the neighbors against you. I'll make them see what you really are." But the words didn't carry the same force they once had. Her threats had lost their sting that weekend. The climax came crashing down. It started with another HOA meeting. Karen insisted on holding it, claiming it was business as usual. Only about half the neighborhood showed up, most out of morbid curiosity. She stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand. "Trying to rally her old authority neighbors," she began, voice high and sharp. "This community is under attack. One man's reckless actions have brought government eyes onto us. He's trying to destroy the HOA from within, and if we let him, everything we've built will crumble." But before she could continue, the doors at the back opened. 2 DHS agents entered, followed by a uniformed officer. The room went silent. Karen froze mid-sentence. "Karen Miller?" Agent Ramirez said firmly. Her face was drained of color. "What is this?" "You're under arrest for destruction of federal property and obstruction of a government investigation." "Please step forward." Gasps filled the room. Neighbors turned wide-eyed toward her, their expressions a mix of shock, relief, and something else, vindication. Karen clutched her clipboard like a life raft. "This is a mistake. I was enforcing HOA rules. This is harassment." But the agents weren't listening. They moved closer, calm and steady, as though they had rehearsed this moment. The officer recited her rights. Karen's voice rose into a shriek. "You can't do this to me. I am the HOA. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." Her words echoed off the clubhouse walls, shrill and desperate, as the agents guided her toward the door. The clipboard slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. When the doors closed behind them, the silence was deafening. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, quietly, someone in the back said, "About time." The room erupted in murmurs. Some people looked shaken, others relieved, but the consensus was clear. The reign of Karen was over. I stood there, taking it all in, not gloating, not smiling, just breathing. For years, she had been the immovable force in our neighborhood, untouchable and unchallenged. And now she was gone, not by my hand alone, but by her own arrogance and the weight of the Lowain. The days that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Without Karen's constant patrols, people began to relax. Kids played chalk games on sidewalks again. A veteran parked his truck in his own driveway without fear. Christmas lights sparkled in every color, unchallenged. The HOA board, once her loyal subjects, scrambled to distance themselves. Some resigned outright. Others begged forgiveness. A new interim president was appointed, someone fair, reasonable, and the kind of person who understood that rules existed to serve the community, not control it. As for me, DHS replaced my receiver with a newer, more advanced model. They thanked me for my cooperation, and though they couldn't say much, I could tell they appreciated my documentation. But the image that stuck with me most wasn't the new dish or the relaxed smiles of my neighbors. It was Karen, being led out of that meeting, shouting into the void. Her clipboard abandoned on the floor. For years, she believed she was untouchable. But no one is untouchable forever, and in that moment, as I stood watching the sun set over my quiet little street, I realized something important. Sometimes justice doesn't roar like thunder. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, builds slowly, and then, at just the right moment, strikes with precision. For Karen, that moment had finally come. The storm that had raged through our neighborhood wasn't one of wind and rain, but of control, pride, and reckless power. When it finally broke, it left ruins in its wake, but also clarity. Karen had always believed herself invincible, her authority untouchable. For years, she had ruled our streets with bylaws and fines, with threats slipped into mailboxes and smug lectures delivered on porches. She wielded power not as a service but as a weapon, convinced that being the HOA president made her queen of the block. But even queens fall. The night federal agents came for her is one I will never forget. I didn't watch from a distance. I stood right there on my lawn, arms crossed, while black SUVs rolled up silently, headlights cutting across the cul-de-sac. Doors opened, men and women in dark jackets stepped out, and the entire air shifted. This wasn't another neighborhood squabble. This was real. Karen's doorbell rang. She didn't answer at first. The agents knocked harder. Voices carried firm, authoritative, the kind of tone Karen herself had once used to make others squirm. Finally, the door creaked open. She stood there, robe wrapped around her, hair messy, eyes darting left and right. For once, she looked small, vulnerable. "Karen Miller?" one of the agents asked. Her voice cracked. "What is this about?" "You know what it's about," the agent replied simply. Papers were handed over. Words like tampering with emergency communications equipment, federal violation, and potential felony charges floated through the air. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, phones in hand, some filming, some just stunned. Karen tried to argue. Of course she did. She claimed it was just a dish, that she was protecting neighborhood aesthetics, and that she had authority under HOA bylaws. The lead agent cut her off cold. "Your HOA rules don't supersede federal law." The words sliced through the night like lightning. That was the moment. That was when her reign ended, not with a dramatic fight, not with her screaming and cursing, but with the truth. Spoken plainly and backed by the weight of real authority. She wasn't arrested on the spot. The process would be slower, winding its way through hearings and paperwork. But everyone understood. Karen's empire had crumbled. The following days felt different. The street that had once been tense and hostile began to breathe again. Neighbors who had long avoided each other came out onto their lawns, nodding, waving, and even striking up conversations. It was as if her shadow had lifted, and light was finally able to reach the cracks she had tried so hard to seal. For me, it wasn't just about relief. It was about restoration. I repaired my dish, this time mounting it stronger than ever, wires neatly tucked, signal shining clearer than before. When I powered it up and saw the green light flash steadily, I felt something deep in my chest loosen. It wasn't just about television or the internet, it was about freedom. The right to live without someone else's obsessive grip around your throat. Karen tried to return to normal life, but it was impossible. The neighbors she had once intimidated now ignored her. The board she had controlled voted her out swiftly, almost gleefully, citing loss of trust and serious misconduct. She became a ghost in her own kingdom, wandering her yard with bitterness etched into her face. But with no one left to fear her, some said they pitied her. I didn't. Power, when abused, comes with consequences. She had been given chances, warnings, and opportunities to step back. She chose arrogance every time. The most striking change, though, wasn't in her, it was in us. The community found a new rhythm. Meetings were no longer battlegrounds. They became discussions. Instead of fines, there were suggestions. Instead of threats, there was compromise. People started helping each other again, sharing tools, trimming hedges, and offering rides. The neighborhood finally felt like, well, a neighborhood. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip low, a few neighbors gathered around. Mark, the guy 2 doors down, raised his soda can toward me. "Ken," he said with a grin, "you stood up when none of us had the guts." "Don't think we didn't notice," I shrugged, but inside his words meant more than I could say. I hadn't done it for recognition. I had done it because it was right. But knowing it mattered to others, that they felt safer, freer, was a reward of its own. Still, I couldn't shake one final thought. Karen's downfall was dramatic, yes, but she wasn't unique. There are always people like her, those who mistake power for privilege, who confuse leadership with domination. They exist in neighborhoods, workplaces, even families. The real question is, what do we do when we meet them? Do we stay silent, hoping someone else will step in? Or do we speak, even when our voice shakes? I chose to speak. And though it was hard, though it came with anger and conflict, it was worth it. Because silence would have meant surrender. And surrender would have meant she kept winning. Karen's house still stands. She still lives there, though she no longer rules it. The cul-de-sac has changed, but the lesson remains etched in the pavement. No one, no matter how loud or self-important, is above accountability sometimes. It takes a hammer to break a satellite dish. Other times, it takes that very act to shatter an illusion of control. As for me, I sit back, flip through my channels, and enjoy the quiet hum of freedom in the air. Every flicker on the screen reminds me of that night, the night the neighborhood took its first real breath, and sometimes, late at night, when the streets are still and calm, I wonder, if Karen had known the storm she was summoning with one swing of her hammer, would she still have done it? Maybe, probably, but it doesn't matter now. Because the storm is over. And we survived. Now I ask you the question, so, what do you think? Was Karen just a power-hungry neighbor who finally got what she deserved? Or do you believe she tried to make a comeback someday? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I'd love to hear how you would have handled someone like her. And don't forget, if you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, subscribe for more HOA drama, and share this video with a friend who's dealt with a Karen of their own.
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.